Today's date is the 8th of March, 2003. Mr. Jim Biggs is being interviewed for the Veterans History Project. His address is 6321 Russet in Boise, Idaho. I'm Matthew Glenn Cook conducting the interview. Also, Barry Hill is here to run the camera. Jim was born in 1918.
1st of May, 1918.
1st of May, 1918. He served from England during World War II in the Army Air Force. Jim, were you you go by Jim, right?
That's right.
Okay. Were you drafted then, or did you enlist?
No, enlisted in the Guards.
In what year was that?
That was, what was it, 39, September, I believe, the 39.
Mm-hmm. Why did you want to enlist in the National Guard?
Well, it was a new outfit. That's when you had to go in the service for 1 year. And they were starting up the new 183rd Field Artillery, and I figured, why not go with the guys that I know if I'm going to have to serve a year? So I signed up. Besides, I got a rating right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And I was making a whole $32 a month, same as a corporal.
And was that out of, because you were living in Caldwell at the time,
yeah,
or
in Caldwell at the time? Mm-hmm.
And did you pick the Army Air Corps at that time, or? No,
I was field artillery.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of a long story how I got into cadets, but I signed up for that to get out of a pack mule outfit that they transferred me into. Oh. And so the Air Corps was priority, so I went into cadets and washed out in basic. That is the second phase of flying, but probably saved my life because I'd have got over a whole lot sooner than what I did.
So in 1939 you went in to the reserve in an artillery unit, and then you served for a year there, and then how did that go from there?
Well, Pearl Harbor came along, and so there we were. We was already in the service, so that was it.
Uh-huh. And when Pearl Harbor happened, did you then, as they were trying to make decisions of where to send you, and then you saw the opportunity to get into the Air Corps?
Decision was made awfully fast. A week after Pearl Harbor, we were sitting in Fort Lewis.
In Texas?
No.
Where's Fort Lewis in Washington?
In Washington.
Okay.
And then I got in a mix-up with our personnel sergeant. We didn't see eye to eye, and he told me I had to go to a pack mule outfit that was being mechanized, and I was to be the motor sergeant. Instead of that, everybody that went over, regardless of their rank, they were busted to buck private. And we were replacements for 100 and some guys that was over the hill, AWL. And I decided, I was told that you're in here and no way to get out, and I just figured they were wrong. So I went down and put in for the cadets. That's the reason I got out of that.
Okay. Do you remember December 7th, or hearing about Pearl Harbor? What effect did that have on you when you?
I don't know exactly. I just remember listening on the radios, and we was in the barracks there at Fort George Warren, in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And we figured, well, here we go. And especially when they told us we was heading for Fort Lewis, we thought we were going right over. Mm. But it didn't turn out that way.
Okay, so you don't remember how you felt so much? Or?
Well, I don't know. Excited, scared, didn't know what to look forward to. Mm-hmm. And I guess it didn't bother us too darn much. We was all young. We didn't know what we was getting into.
Did, at that point, so you enlisted in the cadets, were you accepted immediately into the cadets, or?
Yeah, it was about 2 months before I was called up to go.
Mm-hmm. From Fort Lewis, where did you go after that?
Santa Ana, California.
And started cadet training?
That was pre-flight. And went to Oxnard, California for primary, and went to Bakersfield for basic, and I washed out there.
As far as your family, did you have brothers who were also in the service?
Oh, no, I'm the only male.
Okay.
I had 3 sisters, but I'm the only.
I'll bet your mom and dad were probably pretty concerned for your welfare as...
Well, I guess. I don't know. I imagine any parent is, but we wasn't thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to stay in contact with them pretty well through the series of coming up and going in? How were your communications with them, with the letters they sent to you? Was that?
Oh, we got plenty of them.
At least while you were stateside, anyway.
Yeah.
Was there something that, so you went from cadets, you went into, and you washed out. Then from there, what job did you eventually
get? Well, I wanted to be a mechanic and said you had to take gunnery first. So we went to gunnery school at Las Vegas. And then after that, they says, now you get to be a mechanic, we'll send you to Amarillo. And went through that school there and was made an engineer and assigned to a crew, and we went to Dyersburg, Tennessee to train. We trained there until along in April.
Mm-hmm. Of what year?
Of 44.
Oh, wow.
And then we shipped overseas. We flew a plane up to Goose Bay, Labrador, Reykjavik, Iceland, and on to Nuts Corner, Ireland. That was in North Ireland. And then they took the planes, and we had to go by boat and train from there on to our base. And then I ended up with the 388th, which was formed originally here in Boise.
Oh, wow. And so first you started gunnery school. How was that? Was that tough, or was that...
Oh, no, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, we got to shoot a lot of shotgun shells up at various ranges. And the most fun to me was what they called, well, you rode in the back of a pickup, sitting on a box with a pump shotgun, and you had a circle that you went around at about 30 miles an hour, and there was 25 trap houses around this circle. And you didn't know where the bird was coming from. Sometimes it'd be from the back. And to me, that was more fun than anything, was shooting that. Of course, we also liked the aerial gunnery, too. But you're just shooting at a doggone flag out there, you might say, a tow target. So it wasn't too thrilling or anything like that. But the shotgun part I enjoyed.
Had you shot a lot before you got into the service? Or?
Oh, yeah, I'd been hunting ever since I could pack a gun.
So it was natural.
Yeah.
Did that take... So you must have spent a long time in training between December of 41 and shipping over in 1944.
Well, there's always shipping you first, this place, that place. I didn't think I was ever going over.
And was a lot of that time usefully spent, you felt?
Yeah, you was learning something all the time.
Mm-hmm. As far as mechanics school, what kind of things did you learn there?
Well, just general, because we didn't have to work on the planes on the ground. Some places they did. They didn't have a good ground crew or anything, but my main job was watch instruments on takeoff and landing. Also, if the landing gear wouldn't come down or wouldn't come back up, I'd have to hand crank that. Had to transfer gasoline by hand and fix anything that you could fix, which there isn't very much you can do when you're in the air.
Can't pull it over to the side of the road. So. And so they taught you what you needed to know, at least to be helpful in the air to the degree you could be. Gunnery's practice, how did that go? You'd take off?
You had various things that you'd done. You had flexible guns and you had turrets. The flexible guns was fired from a AT-6 from the rear cockpit. And then the others is various bomber types, big Aventuras, even had AT-11s with turrets on them. And you fired the 50 caliber out of the turrets.
Mm-hmm. And was you pretty good at that then, or?
I don't know. I didn't get to have the date with Jenny Sims, which the top gunner got to do. But all in all, it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. So you shipped over in '44 and got into Ireland, and then rode the train and the boat down. Where were you stationed out of in England?
It's called Nettishall. It about halfway between Cambridge and Norwich. And we got there, and it's kind of funny. They didn't tell us which squadron we were in or how to get there. They gave us a mattress and sheets and that stuff, and we had to find our own place, and we was there for about 4 days before they could find us. And they was wondering what the heck happened to us. Oh, well, we didn't have to fly quite so soon. Then when they found us, the first time mission was Berlin. And we didn't have sense enough to be scared. And come back, we only had, I think, half a dozen or so holes in us, and we was disappointed. But after that, we found out what it was all about.
Mm-hmm. So at first, you had a hard time hooking up with your unit, and it took about 3 or 4 days. Were they?
They were looking for us. Yeah.
Were you in trouble for?
No. I said, well, why didn't they tell us where? They just gave us that stuff and shoved us out of the outside, and we looking around. We didn't know where we were supposed to go. They didn't tell us.
So
they told the other 2 crews, but they didn't have to tell us.
It sounds. How was military life and adjusting all this? What were the condition when you came into this environment? How was that?
Well, it was pretty good because the first officer I served under was a captain. His name was Eisenberg, and one of the best gentlemen I've ever known. And instead of private this or sergeant this or that, it was always your first name he called you by, and he knew every man in the outfit.
How many men were in your outfit?
Well, I don't know really. There's quite a few of us. Mm-hmm. But that's the way Eisenberg was. And you felt at ease around him. Now, some of the other officers, man, you're supposed to snap to and everything. I forgot to salute him one morning. I was so tired on our convoying out to Fort Lewis that I seen him go by, and he was a major. But then I said, "Good morning, Major," and he saluted me. He says, "Hi, Jim," with a big grin on his face, and he got a salute, I'm telling you.
So was he in reserve then, or was he regular?
No, he was regular. They boosted him on up. Mm-hmm. He finally ended up as a full colonel overseas. And the last time I seen him, I was coming out of the air terminal in Boise, and he was going in, and he grabbed my arm, and he says, "Jim, they retired me as a general." And that's the last time I seen him, but he was really one good guy.
And he was your commanding officer?
To begin with, the first one I had with the guards.
What were the officers like when you got over to England?
Well, depends. Some of them was rank happy. But the three officers that counted wasn't that way. In fact, my pilot didn't like to have you salute him. And we'd do it for orneriness. We'd see him in town and we'd string out and we'd all give him a salute. And he'd come up to our room at the hotel and he'd chew us out with a big grin on his face. But that's the way he was. I mean,
why do you suppose some men were that way about rank and others were not?
I don't know. I think it's ego. Because as a rule, I'd say 90% of the flying officers especially, they just didn't go for that. And they were up there with you, and actually the gunners was protecting their butts. So some of them finally found that out, and it finally dawned on them that their crew was saving their life too, so maybe they'd better be a little bit better to them. But
right. Did you, with the crew who you flew with, did you know, had you been in training with them and you moved all the way through that as a unit, or when you got to England were you put together with a bunch of guys?
No, we trained here in the States together.
So you knew your pilot, you knew all the men in the various positions.
My pilot to me was Mac. His initials is Casey, sometimes it was just Casey. Mm-hmm. And that's the way we were. And if you called him sir, he'd let you know about it.
So, and then your first mission you were telling me about was to Berlin, and you got a few holes in the plane from flak, I assume.
Yeah, but the closest thing we come to getting it really was after the bombs away, we made a 90 to the left and was heading out toward the North Sea, and the plane above us kept coming down on to us, and the plane below us was coming up. The pilot was watching the plane coming up, the co-pilot was watching the plane coming down, and when that prop got about 5 foot from my top turret, I was beginning to wonder whether to duck or what to do, but I more or less just froze there. And finally the pilot seen what Joe was trying to do, that co-pilot, so he side-slipped out from under him, but it was close.
Wow, and that was part of your first, that was the most exciting part of your first.
That scared us more than the flak.
Oh my. What was the next mission like? Or
that was it. The next mission was easy. We went to Metz, France, and it happened to be on my 26th birthday.
Oh, wow.
And we hit the marshalling yards there. And our radio man, he was kind of sealed away. He couldn't see what was going on. And he told the bombardier, says, leave the bomb bays open, and then tell me when the bombs are about ready to hit. He says, I want to see them hit. So we were going along there, and there was tracking us with flak, but they were shooting just ahead of us. And we'd hit a black puff of smoke just about the time another one had opened up in front of us. Well, the bombardier says, well, they're about ready to hit, Mike. And he opened the door just as we blew in one of those smoke puffs of smoke, and it come in through the radio room, and the fellas in the way says, you never seen about anybody slam a door shut so fast in your life and lean against it. Boy, they're not going to get me. But he didn't get to see the bombs hit.
That's funny. So he was, the smoke came in as you were going through it.
It scared the heck out of him. I didn't know about it until after we landed, and the guys in the waist had to tell me about it. But it was very peculiar. They had a big arc in one track there on the siding. I mean, a great big bow. And I was watching the bombs drop, and somebody took out that whole doggone section in an arc. And how he done that, I don't know, because the plane must have been correcting and getting back into the proper formation, because he just took out that whole doggone arc. And about every 50 feet, a bomb hit.
Oh, I see.
And I'd never seen anything like that before.
So he was turning as the bombs
evidently,
were, and they hit the ground in an art.
Yeah, he just took out that whole siding out.
Oh, wow. What are some of the other things you remember from life as you're going through this? Now, what were the total? You served. You flew how many missions? 18 missions
altogether.
total. What were I know the 17th was real memorable, but tell me more about what happened in between the first and second we've talked about and number 16.
I can remember one mission we were on, and I looked back and there was 6 Messerschmitts after a bomber, and he was on fire. And he was going down, but he looped it 3 times. Just one loop, one right after another, and losing altitude all the time. And they couldn't get a good beat on him. And he went into the cloud bank, which had a complete cloud coverage. We was up above that. And later on, when I was at what we call the flak home, it was R&R, and we was shooting the breeze, and I says, do you believe that I seen a B-17 loop 3 times without shedding a wing? And one of the guys there says, yeah, and he made it home too. It was from his group. He says the wingtips is almost touching the ground, but he made it.
Oh, wow.
And that is because a B-17 is not supposed to be upside down. And but he made it.
Wow. So he figured if the Messerschmitts don't get me, I might at least have better chance with the plane. How did you see a lot of fighter action or?
We didn't catch too much. I think we had too good a formation most of the times. They'd like to hit the sloppy formations. And I remember that one day there must have been between 75 or 100 fighters. Just looked like a flock of birds. There was no formation. It was kind of just how birds will fly. And it's coming right at us, and our group leader headed our group right into them. So they swung wide of us and hit the group behind us and just really knocked the heck out of them. Mm. But I think they know who we were. we flew a good formation, and they liked the sloppy ones. So that, and then later on, I can remember that lead plane out of that group. After our fighters moved in and chased them off, that thing nosed over. I never seen anybody bailing out of it, whether they'd already bailed out or what, but anyway, just nosed over and started down, the tail peeled off, and just kept on going. So,
did you have a chance to shoot at fighters as well coming in? It sounds like you intended to try to
No, the first one I tried to drop down, I was pushing the push-to-talk button switch instead of the firing switch, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with my guns. And they was coming. It was forget how many there was. It was so Herman Goring's yellow nose, as they called them. They were coming right at us and right down through the formation. And then when I finally realized what I was doing, I swung around and I had one dead to rights, but the tail switch wouldn't let me fire. I'd have blown the vertical stabilizer right off. But I didn't tell the rest of the crew for over a week about me, why my guns wasn't working until the second pass.
Did they give you a bad time after that? Or?
Yeah, but I sure felt like a damn fool, I'll tell you that.
When did you have a lot of time off between missions?
Sometimes.
What would you do to fill that time?
And sometimes it'd be the very next day.
Oh, wow. And what would you do when you had time off?
As little as possible.
So you wouldn't go, was there a town close by you could go into?
Oh, yeah. And then we had a pub on our base. So you built around a little community. And you had the civilians coming and going all through the camp. In fact, they'd wake us up maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, get down to briefing, and we'd be heading for the mess hall first and meet one of those old Irish workmen on there, and he'd tell you where you was going, what your bomb load was, what altitude you was going in, everything, your gas load and everything. And when we'd get to briefing, he'd be right. So that was the secrecy that we had over there.
Just the civilians in the community were so close.
The civilians knew more about it than what we did.
How did that happen?
I don't know.
It seems somebody was not doing their job like they were probably supposed to then.
In fact, once they're on the radio access cell, he says, if you don't believe what we're talking, they called us the Pale H's. He says, we're going to get you the next time. If you don't think I know what I'm talking about, go down to operations. Your clock is so many seconds off. And we went down there, and she was right. So there you go again.
Wow. That would not give you a lot of confidence going out. Were there other memorable experiences in your time over there, either back at base or with going into town, dealing with civilians, or?
Well, the only thing I can really remember is we were going to go to Brux, Czechoslovakia, and they gave us a plane out of a different squadron that had empty K-ration boxes all over, dirty. The gasket out of the upper turret was gone, and the wind had whistled through there. And we didn't know whether that plane was that kind of a crew on it, if it'd even make it or not. And we got out over the channel, and somebody test fired his guns and shot our number 3 engine out, so we come back home. And we were real happy.
You didn't have to fly this plane you didn't know anything about. How about other missions as you came up to? What was your 16th mission like?
I don't really remember.
It's kind of a standard thing. Did you follow what was going on in the war in other areas very closely, or did you not have a lot of information about that?
Let those guys over in the South Pacific fight their own war. We had ours to take care of.
Well, even with what was going on in your war in the European theater, how much did you follow events as they developed?
You didn't really think about it.
Mm-hmm. When on what was the date that you started your 17th mission?
Let's see, I think it was 15th of June, 16th of June, I forget.
15th or 16th of June,
yeah.
So after D-Day.
Yeah.
Did you participate in the D-Day operation?
We were the first group over,
oh, wow.
And I flew 2 missions that day.
And
couldn't see a thing. It was above the clouds all the time.
So it was pretty uneventful.
Uneventful. That was the easiest mission that we've ever had, I suppose, because we only got 1 burst of flak. And the fighters was roaming below, and they took care of the anti-aircraft guns right off the bat. So, in fact, we had orders not to shoot unless somebody was shooting at us.
Mm-hmm. And did you? One thing I meant to ask is, as you were going along and on your missions, fighter support. Did you see get a lot of support from the fighters?
Yeah, once in a while it'd be a mix-up, and you'd lose them, and the fighters would move in. But after they got the P-51s over there that would fly so much farther, and then they put belly tanks too on the P-47s, why that changed things altogether.
Did you know many of those guys, the fighter pilots, or
didn't know any of them?
So didn't work together. I guess let's talk about your mission 17 and how did that morning start off, or what kind of details can you give me of that day?
Well, that's kind of peculiar. I had a very, very funny feeling that morning. Something wasn't right. And we went to briefing. It was a doggone what we call a milk run, a supply dump over in Calais, France. So I just dismissed it, said flak free except over the target. And it was that way until we got about 10 miles away from the target, and there were 7 guns there they didn't know about, and they opened up and they hit us 3 times and 3 salvos. And I think we was the only plane in the group that got hit.
So what all happened that day?
Well, they knocked the plexiglass out of the nose first. And the next burst riddled the bomb bays, and I had to get smart and say, well, looks like somebody's mad at us. And the next thing I knew, I was looking out through a hole to the fire. We had fire going inside and fire outside. Number 3 oil tank was on fire, and the oxygen was burning on the inside. And I was all tangled up in ammunition belt, and I couldn't move, and my pants was blowed off, and and I got burnt real bad.
Did you have an initial sense of your injury, or?
I knew I couldn't get around. I was trying to, and the co-pilot came back and put the fire out, the oxygen fire out. And then Mac dove the oil fire out. And I don't remember anything till after I woke up in the radio room, and I don't know, I didn't remember getting back there, but the radio man come up and got me, I guess.
And he pulled you out of the turret position?
No, I was on, he didn't have to pull me out of the turret, I was laying on the floor.
But he pulled you back into the radio?
No, I had the door open, he told me, and was going to bail out, I guess, because I was reaching for the salvo switch to open the bomb bay doors. And he come up and picked me up and walked me through the bomb bays, and then give me a big shove in the radio room. And he says all he could see was bare flesh. My pants was blown off. And I came to there. They had a walk-around oxygen bottle. And then I can remember them arguing whether to give me a shot of morphine or not. And I passed out, and the next thing I remembered is coming in for the landing. And it was the smoothest landing my pilot had ever made.
Now, of course, the plane was damaged. How bad was the damage to it?
Well, the right landing gear was shot away. And, of course, the number 3 oil tank was on fire, and the controls of number 4 was out, so we only had 2 engines to get back on. And it wouldn't have been so bad, but there's too much, it was just like a wind tunnel coming through. See, all the nose is gone, and then that wind blowing through there, and it's just too much air drag. But we had, I'm still saying, the best navigator they had in the European theater.
What was his name?
His name was Lina. Big, tall, easygoing guy. But they told me that Max says, give me the heading to the closest airfield in England. And he didn't even have his maps yet. That was all sucked out when that nose was shot out. And from the top of his head, he told him what heading to take, and it put him right on the runway. Said it was just like making an approach all the way across the channel. And he had to make about a 10-degree bank, and we was right on the runway. Another 100 yards, we wouldn't have made it.
Wow. And did you, so you made it to the runway and bellied in?
Just bellied in.
Were you the only one injured?
Bombardier and the navigator each got their hands cut, and then one of the waist gunners sprained his ankle kicking the waist door out so they could bail out. And they gave him the Purple Heart for it. He wouldn't even take it out of his locker.
Didn't feel he deserved it. What happened with the shell that hit the blew out the plexiglass on the nose? Nobody was injured from that?
Well, they got, like I say, they cut their hands. Now, they might have cut their hands coming through the top turret. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think it was just on pieces there.
And it must not have exploded at that point. It must have just struck it.
Just part of it, you know. No, nothing. Well, it was close enough just to knock all the plexiglass out.
Mm-hmm. So you woke up, and you were, just as they were making the approach, he bellied it in. It was the smoothest landing he'd done before?
Yeah, it was. I used to kid him because he wasn't very big, neither was the co-pilot. And you fly formation, And all those planes was no help at all on it. It was all strictly muscle. You flew those by cable. And when we'd come in, he'd bounce it once or twice. And of course, I'd say, well, Mac, how many landings do you want me to log up? First, last, or all 10? And he'd say, well, go to hell. Anyone you walk away from is a good landing. Did
the other members of your crew, did they go on and do other missions then? Or
yeah, they finished out, all but the co-pilot. And the co-pilot got to fly. He flew with a new crew on their first mission and was killed. He was the only married man on the crew and had a little boy. And all the rest of us were single.
Mm-hmm. Did after you got out of the plane, how did things go from there? They took you to the hospital, I assume? Or?
I had to spend a week in an English hospital. Now, Barry, he is English, but that is the worst treatment that I ever got. I was the last one they would look at even. I'd say, will you please move my legs for me? I couldn't move them. And they say, well, haven't got time, we're giving baths. At 3 o'clock in the morning, they were giving baths. So I was really happy to get out of that damn place. And I was there a week.
And then where'd you go from there?
Went up to a hospital close to Oxford. And then they treated me so darn good that I felt ashamed of myself. I had the best help you could ever ask for. They were really angels there, those nurses.
They were American then or English?
Yeah, they were American.
Okay. Did you hear later from your family what they thought of when they'd heard that you'd been wounded? Or?
Well, it scared the heck out of my mother because she got about a month apart, she got another notice that I was wounded. She thought I'd been back into service again, but so that's how good, they keep records of things. But she got notified twice of the same thing.
Oh, so she was, okay. So she thought at least, well, you might have been hurt, but you were out of action,
yeah.
And then, no, apparently you were back in action and got hurt again.
Yeah.
What was the first letter that you got from them like?
Well, I don't really remember. It wasn't getting too many letters, because they'd have to go, it went to my base and then back to me, and the head flight surgeon would usually bring me my mail if I had any there. Mm-hmm. He was a great guy.
How long were you in the hospital? How long did it take you to recover?
Gosh, I don't know. It seemed like ages, but I was in about 3 weeks, I guess, before they finally got out.
Okay. So as bad, your injuries were bad, but not...
Well, yeah, and I'm still suffering from it.
Uh-huh.
But I had a vertebrae knocked out of place, and then I had my tailbone broken. And I'm telling you, I think every muscle in your body comes right anchored to your tailbone. You can't wiggle your toes, but what it hurts.
Oh, wow. And it still bothers you to this day?
Depends on how set.
Mm-hmm. So it took you about 4 weeks to get over, or to recover and be released from the hospital, and that was all done in England?
Yeah. No. Well, I had to stay in the infirmary. The Major Bell come up and got me, and so I told him if they send me to the rehabilitation center, I'd come back busted, because I wasn't going to do any more KP. I'd done enough of that when I was a private. And he says, oh, I'll go in and give Captain Black a snow job. And he come back, a big grin on his face, and he says, Captain Black's wife and my wife have been friends for years. He said, I'll be back tomorrow and pick you up. We had a stripped down B-17 that didn't have any turrets on it, that they used just to fly around England in. And I think he liked to fly, so he'd come up 2 or 3 times a week to see me.
Give him an excuse to get some time in. So he took you back to the base, and then what happened?
And I just stayed there at the infirmary for a long time until it came time for my crew to get to go on R&R, and we called it the flak home. And they told me I could go too, so I went with them. And we had a aide there, a young second lieutenant. And I couldn't get around much, and he wasn't, that isn't the way he was taught. He was supposed to fraternize with the enlisted men, but we got to be good friends, and he says, why don't you stay another week? He says, you can't fly. He says, I can fix it, so I did. And then along about toward the end of that, he says, why don't you stay again? I says, okay, I'll stay another week. And later on that day, about 11 o'clock, I got the awfulest feeling, and I told him I had to get back to the base. And he says, why? I says, something has happened to the crew. And I got back. My co-pilot was killed at that time, that I got the feeling. So I believe in the ESP. Mm-hmm. That was twice over there. Once when I got hurt, I had it, but it wasn't anything like the next time. And then, of course, it had to, the only guy that was married on the crew had to get killed. Hmm. Couldn't have been one of the rest of us.
Right. So that hit you, and
yeah, that bothered me for a long time. And then last fall, I got a telephone call, and the gal says, are you Jim Biggs? And I said, yes. Says, I'm Joe D. Ritter's granddaughter.
And that was that co-pilot's...
She found me.
Oh, wow. And how did things...
Well, kind of hit me. Still does. I guess I was about as close to him as I was any of them. Mm-hmm. Then I called his son, her dad. She gave me a telephone number. And I said, Jeff? And he said, yeah. I says, I used to babysit you when you were 2 years old. and I did. She came and lived on the base at Dyersburg while we were in training, and there were three of us would take turns babysitting if they wanted to go someplace. And then my sister and my wife were both nurses and had just graduated, and they came down and went to work in the hospital, and we had too many crews, not enough airplanes, so they'd give us a 3-day pass about every 9 days, and we'd go to Memphis and get a string of rooms in this one hotel, and Joe and Lou, that's the co-pilot, and his wife would come along with us and bring Jeffrey, and we'd take turns babysitting. So we had a good time. I mean, we were family.
How did that conversation go when you called the son?
Well, it surprised him, and then I found out a lot of other things that I didn't know. His mother was dead. I didn't know that. And then my pilot was dead, and I didn't know that. He wouldn't communicate with any of us, and I think he blamed it on himself for letting Joe fly with that other crew. And there was other guys that could have done it, but he volunteered, and so no old man went with us. We went on our own. We didn't know anything about it, what we was getting into or damn thing. Mm-hmm. And I think from then on, Mac was different, and he would never communicate with any of the help or any of his the guys, because the one waist gunner used to write him, and he was still unmarried and living with his mother, and she would answer his letters, but Mac never did. And I think it just got to him, because that was the way he was too. He thought a lot of Joe.
Did After you were on base, you went back to base and had learned that Joe was dead, and how did things progress from there? Where did we go from there?
We just put it out of our mind as best as you could, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And but I just missed. I wish to heck I hadn't got hurt. I mean, they got to go. Well, they got to go to Russia, and I was in the hospital when that happened. And I'd have gave my right leg to went on that shuttle run. And
what did they do going to Russia?
They wanted to hit a ball bearing plant in the far side of Brux, Czechoslovakia, I believe it was. Or anyway, no, it's farther than that, because they could go on into Russia. They had enough gasoline, but they didn't have enough to go to the target and come back again. So they landed in Russia. And then that night, the Germans come over and bombed the hell out of them. And I think there were 6 planes that was repairable out of the 40 or 50 planes on the base. And so they came back by Air Transport Command and had a ball down through Rome and Egypt, and they just they really got to see the country.
Meanwhile, you sat in the hospital.
Yeah, there I was in the hospital.
Now, you finally got to take one last mission.
Yeah, I had to talk like hell to do it, but I wanted to finish my crew up.
And it was their last mission as well.
Their last mission, so they let me go. And it was actually a very easy mission. It was Brest, France, way after D-Day. You see, Brest was isolated, but the Germans still had a lot of coastal guns that they was raising hell with the shipping. So we had, it was a scary on the takeoff. That was the worst of the whole trip, because we had a 2,000-pound bomb under each wing, external bombs. And a lot of friction there and holding you back, and I didn't know whether we was going to clear the stone wall at the end of the runway or not. But that was the biggest bombs that we carried, and the only time that we ever had external bombs, but they could rig them up that way. Mm-hmm. But it was easy, no fighters. The only flak was seen was a half a mile away. It was a very, very easy mission.
Mm-hmm. And then that was the last mission that your crew flew?
Yeah.
And they were rotated home?
Yeah.
And then you got rotated home with them?
Yeah, they sent me to another hospital.
Okay.
And I had to wait from there, and finally was sent home.
Okay, when were you sent home?
Well, it wasn't too long after that. And I got into New York just a few days before Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. But I was luckier than them. They had to come back by boat. I got to fly home.
So
I flew from up there in Scotland to the Azores Islands, to Bermuda, to New York. That's the trip we took home.
Where were you when the war finally? Well, at least on VE Day.
Well, I was there in Cowell, I guess, because like I say, I was out early. Mm-hmm. January of '45, I was out.
Okay. What was that like? Because you were back stateside. You'd been in the service, and
yeah, and just like everything else, the guys didn't have to go, especially the ones that was young enough to go, could get bought off. When I went to work for one of them, and they were just looking for that GIs on the training bill so they wouldn't have to pay them anything, let the government pay for it. And that happened to me. Mm-hmm. I started out with one guy, and I broke up with that. I heck with it.
Mm-hmm. Did how would you say? Because afterwards, you became after the war, you became a carpenter. How did your experiences in the war affect the rest of your life? You think of where you were leading up to 39, going in, doing a year's with the expectation of going in for a year and then moving on with your life. But then this whole thing gets in the middle there for about 4 or 5 years. How did that change?
Well, I was disappointed because I got hurt and got discharged. I wanted to stay in. I wanted to stay in and get on Air Transport Command. My assistant, they called him assistant engineer, he didn't like to fly. And we corresponded back and forth, and they sent him to C-54 school in Los Angeles. And we were writing back and forth, and I got a letter from him one day, and he says, well, I got to hurry up and close this. He says, I'm heading for India tomorrow. He says, I just got in from Japan. And I was sick, I'm telling you. And he didn't like to fly, and I just crazy about it.
Mm. Did you do any flying after the war? Find a way to get into planes? Do anything?
No, I went up, just now and then, but cost too much money.
and it still does.
Yeah.
I assume you may. As far as life afterwards, how long were you home before you married, or I assume you married, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't get married before I was in the service, because I wasn't too sure I'd get back. So I waited till after, and then I got married that fall at 45.
All right. So by then the war was completely over, and?
No.
Or?
Let's see. I think. It was in Europe, but I think the Japs are still hammering away.
In fall, well, when were you married? What's your anniversary?
In August.
Oh, okay.
It might have been already, I think it was.
I remember Japanese surrender being the 2nd of September, so at least that's what I remember. And then you just kind of went on with life. Anything? Have you had a lot of reunions? Have you over the time?
Oh, they have a reunion every year, but I only made a couple of them. This last one was in Boise, so that was easy.
And what's it like getting together with, or whenever you have had contact with some of the people you knew back in those days?
I don't get to be in contact with very many of them. Now, there was one fella in my squadron, lives just outskirts of Nampa here. And he was in my squadron when I was there. He says, I can remember you packing that piece of foam rubber around so you could sit on it. And he was there when I was there.
Okay. But you didn't remember him? I
didn't remember him, but he remembered me on account of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't I've got to see just 2 crew members that I was with. One was the Texan. I went down and seen him just a few months before he finally died of cancer. And the other waist gunner, he died just a little bit after that, and I'm not sure what killed him, but I still think it was from getting splinters of aluminum in his legs, and he wouldn't report it. And I think that aluminum stayed in there and finally poisoned him enough that it killed him, because afterwards, we kept in contact, and he says, he told me he just got out of the hospital. And I says, what's the matter? And he says, with my legs. And I says, what's wrong with your legs? He says, remember when that big chunk of flak went through that took all the control cables out? And I says, yeah. And he says, well, I got some splinters of aluminum in my leg. Well, he should have went in and had it taken care of.
That was the same mission you were injured?
No, that was a different one. No, this one was over we was over Berlin that day. It was fairly early in the run.
Why do you suppose he didn't report that?
He was that way. He was, I'm from Chi. Tough guy. Mm-hmm. You couldn't tell him a damn thing right at first. Finally, he says, you know, he says, I thought I was pretty doggone tough at home. He says, always carried the Stumdose 38 with me. He says, when I get home, I'm going to throw that damn thing so far out in the lake, they'll never find it. and he changed, but he was a regular Chicago boy. And he didn't take anything, you know, from anybody else. But turned out to be one of the best friends I had.
Anything else you want to add or think of that comes to mind?
No, not really. Like, oh, you always had a lot of funny things happen, but a lot of them you can't tell. Only in mail company, and that's all.
I understand.
but some of the things that
it's the military after all.
But one thing that did I can remember that was funny, and everybody got a big kick out of it. This one bombardier said, told a navigator, and his navigator told it on him. He says, "I'm hit." He says, "Can I help you?" He says, no, stay with your gun. And he says he grabbed the first aid kit and put a tourniquet on his leg, and then he pulled his flight boot off, and then he pulled his heated shoe off, and a piece of flak fell out of his shoes about the size of $50, and all he had was a blister on his heel. And he says, what are you going to do when the blood starts pouring? He says, if you put a tourniquet on for a blister. Do you like to never live that down?
I'm sure the stress of the situation, he assumed the worst. Happily surprised it wasn't worse. Well, about the patch design you have for your unit there.
Well, I don't know who came up with it, but it says Fortress for Freedom. Mm-hmm. And of course that got started from the fortress part from a news correspondent when they first brought the 17 out, and they thought, man, nobody could get to it, and it is a regular fortress. Mm-hmm. And that's how the Flying Fortress started out. But it wasn't too sure, so they'd put broomsticks, anything there. And that would stop them from coming in so much on the tail, because they didn't know whether it was a gun or not.
That's great. Now, we're out here by your display of some of the your artifacts and things that you've donated to the museum. Can you talk to us about some of the items in here in the case?
Well, gosh, I don't know. The pictures, that was the class that I was in for the mechanics. And it was a kind of an odd thing. The little guy there, the second row up and right in the middle, his name was Octavio Zanetti. Mm-hmm. And he was one of my pals, and he walked into the hospital over in England to see me, and I said, how the heck did you know I was here? Because he was in a different group. Well, he says, don't you remember so-and-so just got discharged the other day out of here? He says, I heard him mention your name. He says, there's only one Jim Biggs in the service. So he says, I just hopped the ambulance and come up to see you. And that really made my day.
That's terrific, seeing some of your buddies from the old unit. How about your medals down there? We know the Purple Heart is for the injuries you sustained when your plane was hit. What's the other medal for?
Yeah, there's an air medal. You get one for every 5 missions. And
you flew 17, so you got 3 then.
Yeah. Well, they gave me another one anyway because he got hit in the butt. But they'd give you an oak leaf cluster for a second award of the same medal. So on your ribbons that you wore on your uniform, you would have that ribbon and then an oak leaf cluster for each award again. So, and one of my buddies, it was a in the tank outfit, he had a Purple Heart with 7 oak leaf clusters on it. He'd been wounded 8 times.
Oh my. Oh my. Now, and this was your dress uniform that you wore during the wartime, or?
Yeah, that was our old horse blanket.
And now, as far as some of the other equipment, you've got the flight gloves and the boots. Is that what you did wear, or?
You wore the boots, but not the gloves. The gloves was pre-heated suit time. I mean, they used to have the wool or the sheepskin coat and pants and boots and gloves. But then they came out with a heated suit, which is nothing more than like an electric blanket. And you didn't have to wear so much stuff on you. It's a whole lot easier for the waist gunners especially, and then give the top turret gunner and the ball gunner a little bit more room in their places.
As long as the electricity was
As long as
working.
and they did go out once in a while, because mine did. Just approaching Berlin, the only time I could sweat and freeze at the same time.
Now, this is the jacket, and obviously you didn't fly with that jacket, but that would be part of your uniform.
Some of the guys might have, maybe some of the fighter pilots didn't have to worry so much about being bulky, but no, that was more or less a dress jacket, a show-off.
Is there anything else that you've got comment? You've got some English money down there, a krona. Where'd the krona come from?
The krona come from Iceland, and I didn't think about getting a bunch of their money there, because they had one coin there is worth 1/100th of a penny. So they told me, but it was kind of funny trying to get what each coin was worth and everything, and we got took in a lot of places. When you go to spend your money, they figured, oh, he doesn't know, so
they'd stick it to you. Did and this was now? What was there a little story with this oil can down there?
Well, I just happened to be in my stuff. I don't know how come I had it with me, but that was a regular old Air Corps oil can. Bill might want to add a few drops of oil to maybe the machine gun or something, but.
And now there's up there in the top is the. And I'm not sure if we can get a picture of that, but shows the battle damage that your aircraft sustained when you were injured, right?
That's right.
Okay. So obviously, and then that round. Why don't you show us on the picture how that round came up through the plane and stuff? Because we're looking at the I guess the opposite side of the plane here.
Yeah. But the first shell knocked the plexiglass out of the nose. Mm-hmm. And then the next round that came up shattered the bomb bay doors. And like everybody else, was always trying to make fun of everything. I says, looks like somebody's mad at us. And that one had come up through the brake drum and the oleo strut. Of course, the wheel was up. Came up through that, went through number 3 oil tank, and set it on fire and cut the controls off to number 4 engine, and then come through the top turret with me. And when it went through the oxygen system, the oxygen blew up. But hadn't have been the oxygen blowing up, I wouldn't have got hurt very much. It just nicked me on the leg as it went by and cut the strut off of my turret in 2 and went out the left window. But we were just lucky it was a dud.
And there's the oxygen bottles that and it was a dud. It did not explode, or else it would have destroyed the whole plane instantly.
No, just the oxygen exploded. It was a dud.
Oh, well, that's an amazing story. I appreciate you taking the time to do the interview and now show us some of the things.